Welcome to another episode of Four Guys Talking About AI. I'm here with my good buddies Neil Polacek and Greg Sterling. Our friend John Gerard's not available today, so he'll catch us next time. How's it going, guys?
Good. End of a busy week.
End of a busy week. Tons of compelling things going on this week. This week, we're going to talk about a concept called MCP. MCP stands for Model Context Protocol. It's a new protocol that integrates AIs with each other via API. Super propeller head technical stuff. Essentially what it means is that APIs can talk to each other. And you can imagine the implications of that. So we'll explore that a little bit. The local publication Patch has an AI-powered expansion. We'll dig into that a little bit. Could be a bellwether for how other local media companies leverage AI. Volkswagen and Uber have a robotaxi collaboration going on in Los Angeles. That all sounds interesting. OpenAI and Perplexity want to acquire Chrome amid the antitrust proceedings, and we'll dig into that a little bit. But first, let's talk about MCP, Model Context Protocol. It's an emerging standard for AI tool integration, and you can imagine all the automations that can happen with this. Neil, you wanna lead off with that one?
I didn't know what it was 2 months ago, but a friend of mine who works at one of these big companies has been telling me about MCP, and I finally started to say, okay, I better start listening. And as I understand it, it is really the protocol that allows a model, let's call it ChatGPT or any of these models, to then go into existing software platforms and take actions that a user otherwise would have had to take. So a simple example might be, hey, I want to invoice you, Andy, for a job I did. And I tell my agent to go invoice Andy. And the agent now is smart enough to go into wherever I've housed your record. Maybe it's a CRM, maybe it's Pipedrive, maybe it's some simple Excel sheet, some job, completion folder or some project management folder to see, oh, the job was completed. Here's the date. Here's the amount. And then it knows to go into a billing platform to send you an invoice. And then it knows to go into my email client to actually send you the invoice. And so it's the enablement for these agents to go into all these pre-existing software programs that everybody has running their business today.
Yeah.
And the potential is pretty significant because it potentially changes the way all these SaaS companies have built in the past, where now instead of you buying that software package for $29 a month, a seat license, it now might be every time an agent taps into that software application, there's a billing event, there's a monetization event. Very different from a per monthly basis or per seat license basis, but it has really vast implications. And the person who keeps talking to me about this essentially says that anything we do on our computer, whether it be a laptop, a desktop, or a phone, will get done by these machines, by these agents. Anything. If a computer does it today, it will be, if we do it today on a computer, it will get done by an agent going forward. And this MCP thing is the enablement for that to happen.
Makes perfect sense. It reminds me a lot of back in the early days of the browsers when you can have when a browser interacted with a database and it could pull data live into it. You had systems that were running. That was all antiquated. That's early days of the browser. We've come way long since then. But as we are in this early innings of AI, this is potentially, and it seems like it's going to be a transformative way for AIs to be able to really create all kinds of things on the fly. So as we're all, using AI today, we go in there and, your prompts today, I'm sure, are way more advanced than they were when you very first started using ChatGPT or Perplexity,
Yeah,
right? So,
100%.
right. So just like that, even just in the past 6 months, your prompts have probably gotten way more advanced, and the interaction, the conversation that you have, and the thread that you end up having in that session gets longer. Um, Now, if you couple that with being able to dynamically interact with other systems that are out there, right? So that you can say, hey, I'm going to upload a photo of my business, and I want you to create a generative video of me doing X, Y, and Z. And I also want you to create a blog post, and I also want you to create an ad campaign, and I also want you to run the ad campaign targeted at this audience.
And I
And
want
then
you to send it out to some of my friends as well.
exactly, and build me a newsletter also while you're at it, right? And
Right.
do all of these things.
Greg's going to be the pessimist that this isn't going to work.
No, but I am going to be a little bit of a contrarian. I'm not going to be a pessimist. I totally agree that the implications are pretty profound. I see an analogy between MCP and the sort of B2B kind of activity that you're describing, and a tool like ChatGPT or its alternatives on the consumer side. So where's the value creation, right? I mean, the value creation is whoever owns the customer relationship. And this is analogous to what Google did with all publishers. Google inserted itself between the end user and all publishers because it created a certain kind of convenience. As a result of that, it's, able to get $90 billion in ad revenue, yesterday is their Q1 announcement, or against 100 and whatever the total number was, just massive, based on essentially owning the user. And I think this is very analogous. I think the convenience of it, the idea that you could do all these things without subscribing to individual software tools is great and really efficient. It's a brand killer. All the individual point solutions and software suites behind the scenes that are providing the functionality, it kills those. It kills all those brands. You don't care if it's
Unless they
Salesforce.
change their business model and they continued to be that functionality, but now it's being that there's a different business model. There's a different.
They own their own user in their own right, right? So if Greg, if to your point, you got companies like Intuit who have they you got a bunch of QuickBooks users out there, right? So if they do what you said, Neil, and they say, hey, good news, QuickBooks users, you now can use this MCP interface. I'm not going to call it that, but they can say you can now integrate with every platform out there that has an API. Here's a text box, do what you want to do, and it'll magically create it. That's super compelling, and it's just a matter of like which door you go through and what use
Well,
case
yeah,
you're
right. So everything becomes its door into everything else, right? It's everybody can extend their product infinitely. Here's Adobe Photoshop built into the QuickBooks, whatever, right? So you could do that infinitely. But I do think that companies are going to either need to build really compelling products to be the ones that are chosen. And who makes the choice? Is it the
yeah.
system? Is it a human? Or they need to have some really strong proposition for the end user so that they own that relationship.
So for instance, if I were Dentrix, which owns most of the dental offices in terms of practice management, you have to be at Dentrix building that agent that then can interface with whatever billing application they have, whatever, product ordering application they have in that practice, all those applications that they have that go beyond what just Dentrix does. You have to be in that driver's seat. And I would think these vertical solutions, let's call them SaaS solutions that are out there, they have a good chance if they can really lock in that agent role for those business users. But if somebody who's deep into a vertical does not build on this and does not think about MCP and they'll be wiped out. They'll be gone.
The infrastructure has to develop So all these companies have to adopt the protocol. They have to do whatever cleanup of their APIs or their data are required in order for it to really function. And what I think we always do is we get mesmerized by the implications, the capabilities, and the actual execution or implementation of these technologies takes quite a bit longer than expected. And you can point to numerous examples of that. So instead of like 1 year or 2 years, it takes 5 or it takes 7. I mean,
So where this is being implemented first is in writing code. And this person at this big company where I've been talking to, they're pushing hard on using MPC to build code because it can go do the testing. It can go do all these things that in the past people ran applications to do. And now you just tell it to go do that.
right. But I mean, I think, for example, what's going to happen faster than this kind of B2B vision of what you articulated, Andy, which is you can just do everything on an automated basis. Everything is automated. There's only human oversight or very little human input at different touch points. But you just do these 16 different things and it goes and does them. I think that will take a very, very long time. Some version of that may be realized in the short term in a more sort of circumscribed way, but that holistic vision will take a very long time to be realized, if ever. Where I do think it gets much faster, where there's more acceleration, is on the consumer side, where these, we're going to talk a little bit about loyalty and utility with OpenAI and Perplexity, but these LLMs are not commoditized exactly. They're not, but they have quasi commodity qualities about them. They're sort of, you can do certain things across any of them and they work pretty much equally well, maybe not at the margins. And the idea of sort of automating a lot of processes now that are pretty manual. I need to plan a trip and buy a ticket. Do this research for me. I think that stuff happens much faster.
I mean, I don't have a travel agent today, but I do use the United application app all the time because I happen to use United. But they should be enabling me to say, "Hey, I want to go to so and so and do the whole thing." It shouldn't just be for flights.
Absolutely. That's why Travelocity is owning their business, that side of their business. But if you're an airline like United or any of the airlines, you have an opportunity to really extend the value that you can bring to a customer, and this becomes a massive accelerator for those businesses to be able to do that. Now, whether they will or not, we'll see. But you have leaders like in another category. Look at Canva, right? Canva is like early adopter of AI. They've built a big audience very quickly already, but they've transformed that audience to give that audience superpowers to do amazing things on Canva with presentations, with image generation, all kinds of documents that you can create.
Because they saw their customer community as having to extend it, and
exactly. And that they're going to be the early adopters to add that on. Monday.com is also in that category too. They do a good job at building that audience.
Yeah, so there's a lot we could talk about, and I think conceptually using AI as a product extender to add other capabilities into your existing product suite is mandatory for all of these guys that don't want to lose their audience to somebody who has a better approach or is an easier approach. I think there's a lot of sort of tricky questions, second order questions that come into play around scope, around pricing, probably technical stuff that I don't have any insight into.
Let's shift gears on that note, because Patch just announced this week they've got an AI powered hyperlocal expansion that they've done, and they've expanded their reach from 1,100 to 30,000 US communities by leveraging AI generated newsletters. That's a great example of how a company is leaning into this and expanding their reach. Greg, you want to talk a little bit about this?
Yeah, I think this has been going on for a while. It just got covered a little while ago. And, Patch is something that was popular. Tim Armstrong, I think, of AOL, Google initially, and then AOL was one of the investors in Patch. And the model was that it was going to be this kind of hyperlocal news network, not hard news necessarily, but community news and other information that was not being well covered with the collapse of local news. And, they went through several iterations. It got bought, it got spun out, and now they sort of reemerged, and they're profitable, apparently. And they've got all these AI generated newsletters, which I have not read, so I can't speak to the quality. But it's pretty interesting because local news is has been scaled way back under enormous financial pressure, and this is a way for them potentially, although this is a national play, but a way for them potentially to generate unique content, or content that is appealing to their audience in an efficient way, and to generate some additional revenue.
It's a national ad play, but a local content play, right?
Yes.
I mean,
weather updates, social media highlights, those kinds of things.
Yeah, I mean, what qualifies as local news these days is getting pretty kind of wonky, because they're having to pull it from TV and random blogs and stuff like that, because often the local publication is diminished. But it's a pretty interesting model, I think.
but think about the old police log that was in a lot of local newspapers. Now, maybe not the LA Times, but in the whatever, the little town, right? And now you just send this agent into pull all the police reports from all those 30,000 communities. That's not hard to do if those are accessible databases, and you put that together instantly. You used to have a person do that and write it up. I mean, you can just see the economic.
Same thing with events and social media, trackers that you put out there, and you aggregate all that information.
It enables a much smaller team to build something that couldn't have been built by in the past, and really do something at scale with all these tools.
And you can make some money. You could actually make some money now.
Well, I mean, but you can run something like that with a much smaller organization, which is kind of part of the point. Is that previously you had to have a lot of bodies, as you were saying, Neil, and now you can do a lot more with many fewer people. But it's just interesting as an indicator of where local content, local news might go, in the future, and hopefully in a way that isn't just spammy and crappy, low quality version.
And when you have the backdrop of a new protocol like MCP, for example, where publishers can not only aggregate this information, but then they can turn it into video, generative video information, or other ways that you can utilize that information, turn it into ads for local publishers that tie in some of these concepts, so that those ads are contextually relevant to what's happening in that town. I mean, there's a multitude of things that you can do, then become really interesting. So it'll be interesting to see how all that plays out. I'm excited to watch how in particular local media companies start to adopt some of these capabilities. Let's change gears to our next topic about Volkswagen and Uber have a robotaxi collaboration going on. Volkswagen is set to launch a fleet of autonomous electric ID Buzz minivans on Uber's platform in Los Angeles in 2026. I imagine this is a preliminary kind of thing to get ready for the Olympics.
Yeah.
They're going to happen in 2028. A lot of interesting things happening there. And also the robotaxi space. Tesla finally announced this week in their quarterly earnings that they're starting to roll out the Tesla robotaxi as well. I think it's in Austin is where they're starting theirs. Greg, what are your thoughts about this?
Well, I mean, I think this is one of the most interesting stories that's not talked about all that much. I mean, we see coverage of it, but the idea that you have these fully autonomous vehicles, which is an amazing thing in itself, that are now gaining traction in a sort of a in all these cities. I mean, Waymo is obviously ahead of everybody, and they're doing, I forget what the number was, but it was some enormous number of rides that they're now doing in the handful of cities that they're in. And we've talked in the past about how some people, like my daughter in particular, prefer the driverless vehicle for various reasons to these drivers. And I had said previously, I thought that, in 10 years there won't be any human ride sharing at all. I mean, delivery services is a different matter because you have to go into the business and pick something up. But even that is under threat. So I think it's like 4 years, and 90% of the human drivers are gone in major metros.
For ride sharing in particular,
Yes,
right?
ride sharing specifically, not food delivery. That's a little bit of a different thing.
As many Waymos as I saw in the city yesterday. I mean, they are just truly all over the place.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think the logical extension of that, frankly, is to the bus system. Bus drive that's going to automate, because buses don't even have to figure out a different route. I mean, they go routes.
What you can do is you can create an entirely different kind of bus system. You can have like Amazon has these Zoox cars that don't have steering wheels. You can create these sort of mini buses that are smaller, that are optimized for passenger capacity, but not huge. So you can operate a multitude of those in an urban environment where you've got more frequent service. It's not a bus that's got 100 people that can take 100 people, but it can take 10 people, and it's a much more maneuverable vehicle. And I think yes, buses, but not these giant buses. Something smaller that is a people mover or a multi-person vehicle. Something closer to the combis that are going to be in LA, but maybe a little bit bigger.
In the Philippines, they have it's called a jeepney. It's several people jump onto this. It goes regionally into a certain area, and it's kind of like a carpool shuttle kind of a concept. So
Right.
I think what you're saying, Greg, like if you look at economically through that lens, instead of paying point to point for a single rider, maybe instead of it costing $20 per ride, a carpooling kind of thing like what you're describing might cost $8, to ride.
And it goes to designated stops, right?
Yeah,
There's
you
a
have
network,
to, like, get other people's stops along the way. Yeah.
and you can have a much more flexible system with more stops if you have smaller vehicles,
Yeah.
right? You don't need to have bus lanes. You don't need to have, the next stop is a mile away. It can be much more frequent and much more flexible.
Yep.
I think Waymo's proven that consumers are willing to ride it in a driverless
Oh, 100%.
vehicle. And you
100%.
just extend that to other modes, as we're saying, little buses, all that stuff, I think is going to be really interesting.
For ride sharing basically goes away inside of, just in a handful of years, I think is what happens.
Yeah.
There'll be drivers for other kinds of things. Some people will want a driver. Maybe there'll be a category where you can actually select a human. But for the most part, this job category disappears, I think.
But think about it's really, again, the democratization of stuff, that 10 years ago to have a driver to drive you somewhere was really expensive. That price is going down and down and down, and it will be available to virtually everybody to have a ride from, a ride, as opposed to everybody jumping on public transportation. This will be a form of public transportation.
I mean, if all these are electric, then no problem with the environmental impact, putting aside the manufacture of the vehicles. But if they're gas powered or if they're non-electric, it's problematic. It contributes to pollution.
I don't think they will be gas powered, because somebody's got to go fill it up.
They can rotate them until they, hit a certain threshold of how much energy they have left, and then go back to the chargeable and roll the next one out,
Yep.
All right, let's move on to our next topic here. OpenAI is looking at Chrome and possibly acquiring Chrome, or they're talking about wanting to acquire Chrome. Whether they do or not, we'll see what Google says about that. But in the U.S. Department of Justice antitrust trial against Google, OpenAI has expressed interest in acquiring Google's Chrome browser should the court mandate its divestiture. And OpenAI's head of product, Nick Turley, testified that integrating ChatGPT with Chrome could offer users an AI-first browsing experience. Greg, what do you think about this?
Let's focus on that because we don't have enough time to talk about everything. But I think it's an open question whether the court is going to uh, mandate the divestiture, as you said, of Chrome. That's one of the DOJ's requested remedies. Even if the court says yes, you must sell off Chrome, it could be years in terms of appeals to the Supreme Court. Perplexity is also interested for similar reasons. OpenAI wants distribution. Perplexity wants distribution. OpenAI is wanting to create a new kind of browser experience. Let's talk about that because that ties into the MCP stuff.
Great.
I think.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think what does an AI browser look like? I mean, it's a very, that would be the search vehicle, obviously, and there might be a completely different user experience that would marginalize visitation. This is what I was saying before, that would marginalize visitation to websites, or maybe there would be some effort to showcase certain categories of websites. Instead of seeing 20 links, 1,000 links, you would see, kind of a preview of websites, the top 3 or 4, and you might be able to interact with that without leaving without having to click through. I don't know. I haven't thought about this in depth.
I can see that in the search environment, but I would say that like where I see an AI first browser, a really compelling experience is you're on any website, you can have a conversation with that website.
With the website. Yep.
Right. That
Yeah.
to me is like now you're like it's a conversation. The whole thing is a conversation, and the website's a jumping off point for here's what I got, this is what I'm about, and whatever that topic is, you can ask it more questions and now go into a whole dialogue about that.
But wouldn't you, so you've got a blank screen there, right? Or whatever the start page is. Wouldn't you just say, here's my interest, here's what I'm trying to learn, here's what I'm trying to do, and then in the background it pulls together the information for you from whatever set of sources?
Yes, I think that there are different kinds of experiences. There's I need to find an answer to this now experience, and then there's a browse experience where you just kind of like there's the
You want to see a bunch of pictures basically in that situation.
Discovery process. You're a little bit more open. Maybe you're like a little higher in the funnel of your discovery, and you just want information. You want other opinions, not necessarily a chat interface. You want to discover. You're like traveling is a great experience for that, right? You want to discover those things, and Instagram happens to be really great at that. To what you're talking about, where you want to see pictures or videos or that kind of thing. Great way to discover places to go, for example, in that kind of mode, in that vertical.
I think we could certainly agree, without knowing exactly what it would look like, that it would be pretty different than what exists today in the traditional browser.
Yeah.
And it's almost going to be 100% the case that ChatGPT needs to add advertising at some point to their business because they're just burning too much money and they don't have enough subscription revenue and API revenue.
Even if they weren't, the opportunity is there. Even if they didn't need the money, for
advertising,
didn't need ad dollars. Walmart doesn't need ad dollars. All these platforms don't need ad dollars.
Define need. I mean, the investors expect growth, so that's
but
Apple. Apple, which has historically, slammed Google and slammed Facebook for turning your data into their, turning you into the product, right? They've marketed privacy. Those guys are going into ads more deeply because it's an area of growth opportunity that the market is asking for.
There's an insatiable appetite for
growth. Exactly.
Seriously, I think Apple's missing from the whole conversation here. We're talking about Google and OpenAI and Perplexity and all these other companies. Where is Apple in all of this?
They're struggling. I think their own AI efforts have lagged. I mean, that's been widely covered. But they have this partnership with ChatGPT, which is pretty lackluster. They're trying to talk to others to add LLM material in the background or whatever. I think they got to buy somebody. I think they have to come out and buy somebody and accelerate their AI capabilities.
I totally
think
agree.
that
they need some leadership on that front, and really,
they just moved Mike Rockwell, who was the guy that was running Vision Pro, over to Siri. and he's reorging that group. So they recognize that they need to make some changes. And, Vision Pro is a technological masterpiece, but a failed consumer product. I assume that would not be replicated over in their Siri group, because that needs to function. It's a different animal, but he's a smart guy.
I can only imagine Steve Jobs is pulling his hair out wherever he is, going like, "Oh my God,
Yeah.
we're missing it."
They have $50 billion, $100 billion sitting on there in cash, or cash like. They can buy anything they want.
They got to buy somebody and integrate those capabilities, I think.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's wrap it up with that. Thank you all for listening. We appreciate it. Like and subscribe. Smash that subscribe button. Tell your friends.
Smash it.
Smash it. All right, guys. Thank you so much.